Ria Back, welcome to Radio Wolf. I'm very happy to have you here, to have this conversation. In fact, there's a conversation I was looking for a long time, because we are doing similar work.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear about your work, and curious to share notes. The work that you're doing has a beautiful name. It's called collective presencing. That already says a lot. And why don't we just dive into, and if someone asks you, so what is collective presencing about? What would be your first answer?
What it's about? It's about learning, practicing. That's important. It's a practice to be present in conversations, actually. So in that way, it's about dialogue. And it's with this question, like when we are, most of us or all of us, really present and grounded, what then becomes possible? That's like, yeah, what is that capacity that we can access when that is the case? We're not really used to be there, to be in that space. But that's a very short answer.
No, but it already comes to the point. One way I sometimes like to talk about our work, Emergent Dialogue, is I relate it to the mindfulness practice. And I relate it to the fact that there is a whole mindfulness revolution going on since 30, 40 years in the Western world. Something that basically was on the outskirts of our public awareness, like meditation, is now center stage. And it has a lot to do with awareness.
Yeah.
But it's a very individuated focus on awareness. And this new we-space works or dialogical works that are emerging right now, and collective presencing, I consider one of them, are for me something like mindfulness 2.0, where this practice of mindfulness, which is somehow to go beyond this subject-object relationship to just be here, is done in a way where we do it together in dialogue. Is that something that you would relate to in the way you do your work?
Yeah, the only, let's say, side note is that for some people, meditation or mindfulness is like making a distance between thoughts and embodiment, or and when I use presence as a word and as a practice, it's more like being totally in the body. So that's like one side note, but for the rest, yeah, it's of course it's an awareness, and it's of awareness on many different levels. I mean, it's for myself, it's what's happening between you and me, happening in the group, what's happening with the topic or the question. So it's a multidimensional awareness, and that's why it's sometimes pretty difficult and sometimes it works easily, but it's expanding indeed, from because we're so individual focused in the West. And I come from psychology background, so that was very individual originally. And indeed, can we expand our awareness to what's happening in the whole circle? That's at least one thing. Or expand awareness also to where we are if we meet in physical space. And so it's a lot more than just mindful of my thinking.
Right.
a lot
Right.
more.
Right. I mean, you mentioned already some dimensions. You mentioned the embodiment. You mentioned also that we are with each other and that we are somewhere.
Yeah.
And the presencing, as you are practicing and teaching it, is called collective presencing. And you made the point that we are so used to our individual point of view, our individuated way of being here.
Mm.
And let me put it that way. There are many dialogical practices also that focus still on this individual way of also being in a dialogue. Would you agree with that? And I don't mean it that this is a bad thing, because I think we have to be highly individuated
Yeah, exactly.
in every kind of dialogue. But it seems that you're bringing in another dimension in, or you're bringing something in that is also important. How would you describe that?
Yeah, and it seems to be like a contradiction. Like, as you say, like we need to be highly individuated in a way that we are aware of what is my unique thing to bring, to say or not to say. And then expand our awareness, let's say, to the circle or the group or the team in which everybody has that individuation or agency.
Uh-huh.
So it's this and it's that.
Yeah.
And then there's even more dimensions you could add. And it's I've so my history of this is I come from circle practice, from the circle way and the way of counsel, which is actually very old human technology of sitting around a campfire and talk about what's going on and what needs to be done. But probably these folks a long time ago, they were not so much individuated as we are now. And so how to bring what we have gained, let's say, in these last decades and hundreds of years, back with that collective field, for lack of a better word, or that collectivity where we actually are in service of, but not to lose ourselves, like, let's say, my mom did when she was totally in service of the local parish, but she didn't have a life of her own. So not to fall in that trap, but a new kind of synergy there. I think that's what we are after.
No, I very much agree. Sometimes we use a wording, and basically it's an alteration of wording that comes from Ken Wilber. He talks about pre and trans rational. We talk about pre and trans individual. And making the point, a similar point that he makes about rationality, that pre-individuated and trans-individuated seem to be similar because they are kind of not the highly individuated focus alone, but in some way they are completely different because it's a transcend and include movement. It's not going back to a pre-individuated, tribal, traditional way of just being in the surrounding, in the collective. There's the need of a highly individuated presence here. But as you are pointing it out, one can be of service of something different that is beyond my individuality. But in order to be of service of, I have to be aware of. And quite often in our narcissistic times, if I may brand it this way, this is a hard job for us to be aware of more than our self-reference.
Yeah, for a lot of people. And I still grew up in a very small village with, let's say, around 1,000 people, where my parents kind of knew everyone, and there was a women's group, and there was a men's group, and there was a football club. And I mean, it was a community.
Mm-hmm.
But then with the church kind of, I mean, the physical church is still there, but people less and less into that religious bond, you could say. People fell more and more into their own little families.
Mm-hmm.
And you could sense that lots of people are seeking for something, not the old church, maybe not the old football club,
Mm-hmm.
but something of community that's different than we used to, or that different than 1 or 2 generations ago, at least for here. And I think in cities, it's probably worse, if I may say so, because yeah, there's a real need to, what in English they say, to gather, like gathered. Do you know that word? Like it's not something I can translate really into Dutch, but and it comes, or it is used in Quaker practice, where they are gathered. That's how they name that. Yeah. So where they are sitting in silence until the spirit speaks through somebody. That's how they name it. But I think we need that quality of being and speaking and sensing even, I think we need that a lot if we are going to deal with a lot of what's happening in the world, or what's going wrong in the world, if I can say so.
I mean, we all know a kind of being, also being in conversation, where we are very aware of ourselves, or basically why I'm here, what I want, what I fear, what I like, what I dislike, and this kind of being present, where I'm very aware of my all of this, is something that's very close to us. And I suppose that when your collective presence in work is opening up, that something different is opening up. And first, is that so? And if that's so, what is it, and how does it open?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because we only have a few rules in our practice, and is that we call it, we share to the middle and we speak from the middle. Mm-hmm. And sharing to the middle means I can share basically anything what's present in me, even if I'm annoyed by what you just said. I'm not sharing it to you, I'm sharing it to the middle. Like I can say, there was something that Thomas said that's really annoying me, and I just put it in the middle, and I own it as my annoyance. So there's no crosstalk in that way. So there's no judgment in that way. At least we invite everyone to do that, to speak to the middle. And speak from the middle means sometimes you notice, like, I'm not sure I want to say this, but I feel called to speak it. Yeah. And so in that way, we also invite people to, when they think they are done with sharing, to build in a couple of seconds of checking, like, is that all that wants to come through me? It might be that my mind thinks this is it, but there might be living something more. And so we have noticed that people who engage in the practice, and because there's no judgment, there's no crosstalk, there's people start to relax. Like, okay, I can share whatever is alive in me. And sometimes you don't see why is Thomas saying this and Ria saying that, and has no relationship, it seems, at first. But the quality of listening and the quality of speaking makes for a non-judgmental field and a witnessing presence to one another, which makes for some people to relax more and more and to not be afraid, don't judge themselves, and start to speak more from that inner spark, that inner unique contribution that might be a bit weird for Western society, or might be a bit odd, or a dream that has big meaning, or whatever coincidences, that subtle sensing, which we all have, which comes in all our lives, that can also have a part in the sharing. And that makes for a different kind of quality of conversation, of dialogue, basically.
Interesting. If I may interpret that.
Yeah.
Because when you said to speak to the middle and to speak from the middle, that is an interesting movement. Because if I speak to the middle, I have to speak to the middle of something. The middle is always the middle of something. And in order to be able to do that, I have to be aware of this something to speak to the middle of that. So that I'm not just talking to Ria, I'm talking to the middle of our conversation.
The circle, yeah.
Of the circle.
Yeah.
That changes my my reference points.
Yeah, totally.
It doesn't mean I don't talk to Ria. I also talk to Ria, but I also talk to something that's bigger than Ria and me, that has a wholeness, that is a circle.
Indeed, yeah.
That in itself is quite often not the way we talk, because when I talk to you, when I pay attention where my attention goes, I'm aware of me, and if I'm more open, I'm aware of you, not just of myself. Yeah, that's already a lot. That's a good thing, to be just not that you're not just something in my universe, but that I'm aware of you, which is a powerful thing. But the way I hear you, there's a third element coming here. It's not me, not only me, not only you. It's the middle of the circle, which means there's a circle. There's a different dimension coming into consciousness. And then, if I just may add this, the other way around, I find even more profound. Because to speak from the middle means also kind of, I don't speak from Thomas so much, or at least not in the same way. Which is my usually identification point. So I'm Thomas, now I'm authentically telling you what I want to tell you, which is also okay. It's part of it, but it's a certain perspective. I think Thomas, and I really want to tell Ria, but you are inviting to basically not talk from this identification point of Thomas, but to go somewhere else and see that maybe the world looks different from this other, which you call the middle of the circle. Is this the right interpretation?
And what's amazing is that, let's say, what you pick up from the middle, or what I pick up from the middle, or what wants to be spoken through me or through you from the middle has different qualities, because you pick up something else than I do.
Yeah.
Because my, whatever I can sense or pick up or become aware of is like, I don't know, one little piece of the pie, and you have another one. And then there's other people. And it's, when you put all this stuff together, it's like, woo. And I always say, if you would just read a transcript of such a dialogue, it hardly makes sense, because you talk about what you did this morning, and I talk about what I read yesterday. And it's not like that back and forth that we normally do in a Western conversation. But the point is that at the end of a circle, it was meaningful to me. There was some meaning that I can take away, but it's meaningful to you too, but what you take away as meaningful might be different than what I take away. So our whole thing about linearity gets like totally, as a real complexity.
But interesting, there is something which I suppose to be a secret ingredient. Let's put it that way, because I guess we all know conversations where I talk about what happened to me there and there, and you talk about what's important, and the third talk, and it's kind of all over the place, and it doesn't come together. That's not how I hear you.
No.
I hear all that is there, my perspective, this is important, but somehow it comes together. First, do I hear you right? And second, if yes, what is this?
What is this? Lately, I've been making a distinction between harmony and coherence. Because when people first come through these we spaces, I think a lot of people finally feel like, oh, this is nice, and this is joyful, and we all think the same, and that kind of harmony. But whenever you start using these practices in real world situations, like, okay, now let's organize a gathering physically, with 15 people and food and transport and all that. There's more at stake than in an online dialogue, let's say. There's more at stake because I want things to do that way and you want things to go that way. Can we still be in that space of collective presencing, even when we do this practical stuff? And then it's not so harmony thingy, but can we cohere on, I would say, on a deeper level, where we see like, okay, we're all human beings. We all have our shadows. We all have our patterns. We are all different. Even if we're all white and Western educated, we're very diverse in these deeper layers. And can we find coherence in, we're all human beings trying to do our best here, and not go into conflict about this or that or the other.
A way I like to think about this, and it seems to be related, is the power of creative friction.
Hmm.
And what I mean is that the coherence that you're talking about seems to be most interesting when there's friction. I'm not saying it's bad if there's harmony. It can be beautiful, powerful, that has its own value. But there's something, just because of the reason why, because it's difficult, where there is friction. I see something different than you, and it's not just that I see different. I'm invested in the difference. It's of importance. So there's emotional investment in that, and I could harmonize things on a kind of, and then it's nice, but it's not authentic anymore.
Yeah.
Or I could be, so to say, authentic and thrive the conflict with you. It's like, no, putting authentically my perspective, which has its value. But there's something where I'm true to myself and the way I see, but I'm curious and I'm aware of this wholeness that we are in. And there is a value to not fragment in that.
Yeah.
And that feels quite uncomfortable, because I
Totally.
I still maybe don't understand you, I still maybe dislike it or whatever, but there is a choice not to fragment in that. And what
not
I
to
find
judge.
Yes.
Which is the same.
Yeah. And what I find so powerful, not always, but quite often, exactly on these friction points, the most creative insights open up because of the difference.
Yeah, if you can stay there.
So there's something where, because I stay with you and I don't fragment, but I also stay authentic, but I hold this and I'm curious and open, something comes to us in the conversation that I'm not capable of accessing on my own, and the other is also not able to access on your own. Is that kind of related?
It is. And I'm looking these days at what if we, let's say, we fall into a conflict. Like you're triggered, I'm triggered. And then how to come back, how to find a way, a collective method where I call it now digging the tension. Like, can we dig out what is the fight, but what under the fight there's always some hidden gems, some hidden unique contribution from each of us. Yeah. And I'm looking at these days at how can we do that in a way that's beyond the giving feedback, because I'm a psychologist and therapist. I've seen so many times people giving feedback from their own shadow parts, because there's something you need to learn, there's something there's something wrong with you. You should look at it. But so I've always been very kept off feedback. But how can we dig out the gems that are underneath for both parties, let's say, in the conflict? That's what I'm kind of looking at. Can we find a method that is easy enough for most of us and that goes beyond giving feedback because I don't like what you did, kind of? I mean, this is shortcut, but yeah, you probably understand.
Yes. But if I may stay there, how do we do that? How do we dig to these gems? How do we do that?
I haven't finished the research, but I think we need a combination of lots of different things. You have nonviolent communication, and you have internal family systems, and you have circle practice, and you have 12-step programs, and they all can offer something. And I think, because sometimes, or most of the times, when I see you being stuck in a pattern, I probably see it right. Yeah. There's an essence that's right. If I can look beyond your defense and try to see what's your gem, and if I can look beyond my defense and what is, let's say, the gem of my inner part, child part, whatever you call it, if we can talk on that level, without me wanting you to change, like I can name it, but maybe your psychology is not ready to take that on or to change that, or can I just, again, put it in the middle? Like, this is what I see. This is, I think, what is going on in you, but this is what's going on in me. And then leave it. I don't know. I haven't come to a conclusion on that, but that's in the making, kind of.
But it's also true that all these different ways that you were bringing in here have contributions to that.
Yeah.
In their own way. There's something I would like to ask you, if this is also your experience. I sometimes find this part of the most precious moments of this dialogue practice, the way I know it, is when there is, I often call it a gravity shift. And that's really the way how I experience this, or the way how I word it, because it's closest to how the experience feels like. That's sometimes we start a conversation with, I say, with different gravity points of I, you, she, her, him, and all of a sudden there is a coherence building up where the dialogue and the thinking process does not come from the individuals so much anymore, but it comes from a shared place. And it really feels like something is shifting in the room. Interesting, it's not that everyone in the room has to make the shift, but the critical mass. And quite often then others are pulled into this other gravity field, even if they were not on their own going there. And the creativity and the insights come from a place that is not my place, and it's not your place, and not his place. And where everyone is kind of even aware of that we don't talk from ourselves, we talk from this shared place. Yeah. And where this kind of the differences are also answered by a creative process that I participate, but it's not my process. We participate together in this.
Yeah, and I think I've been, in the beginning, long time ago, I thought there was something happening. Like, I don't know, another field created or something. But then I learned, this was Bonita Roy who said to me, like, don't make it into another thing. Yeah. And I was like, okay, but what is actually happening, as you said, in that gravity shift? And I guess, as far as I understand, it's that some of us, or most of us, can shift awareness from the I, me individual to the wider. So that what we call the middle, or whatever you call it, so that the awareness point shifts. Yeah. And if more of us can do that, it seems, that's a word I didn't know when I first came across it in English is entrainment.
Mm-hmm.
Like other people who were not there yet, or like caught up in that consciousness or awareness,
Yeah.
and trained into it.
Yeah. No, it's a very powerful thing, and as you say, it's also very tempting to make a thing out of it.
Yeah.
Because it's also a point where people quite often get quite excited about it because it has a strong emotional reality to it. There's a release of separation, and there's eros coming in. There's something happening that's deeply attractive.
Yeah, totally.
In that, but I see also a danger in this attractiveness, just because it's just tempting to hang out for its emotional benefits.
Yeah, and that's where what we said before on you need highly individuated people, actually, because if you have a wound on belonging, then this point where, oh, it's so nice, and oh, I want to go there again,
Mm-hmm.
and I belong to the circle.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's what keeps people hanging in there. Not hanging is not the right word, but being attached to it, that it will happen again, and
Yeah.
like becoming frustrated when it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
happen. And can we just stay in the presence of, okay, it's not happening at this moment, that's fine too. Yeah. That, yeah, I think belonging has a lot to do with it, because it's a very early unconscious need we have.
And it also very easily turns everything into a group mind.
Yeah.
That's also where the individuation is so important.
Yeah.
In a constructive way, in a way that the individuation is wholeness aware. Let's put it that way, because if individuation is only self-aware, it cannot relate to that. It cannot take responsibility for that. But if individuation is aware of its embeddedness in something that's in a, then this tension that, at least to my understanding, never really disappears between there's kind of a dialectics between what is happening with the others, with the whole, with me. It's not tension free, and it should not be tension free, because the creative force is exactly in this tension. And when it becomes this, oh, I belong, something becomes flat.
Yeah, if that's the only thing, yeah, or if that's the psychological need, yeah.
And the term that then very often fits what appears is conformity.
Yeah, and that's what I called before the harmony thingy, instead of, wow, I don't understand what's happening with you, and I'm still here as a human being, and I respect totally your whatever caused your patterns, which I don't understand, but I respect them, and I can just be still with my intention, with my attention, with my awareness in what's in between us, even if I don't understand you as a person. I mean, it's pretty difficult.
But in the danger to making a thing out of it, I find it very remarkable that this gravity shift that I try to explain really feels also very decentering in a positive sense. That my usual, this is Thomas, me, this is how I walk through the world, this is how I see things, gets somehow decentered, that I even would describe it as a disidentification process. There's something between us that becomes very real, and to use a metaphor, that it even seems the possibility opening up that one can see through the eyes of the field, the eyes of the middle. Would you agree with that, or is that already going too much in the danger of making a thing out of this?
I just use different words, I guess. I would say you leave more of your personality identity, and you drop more into what I call your soul's calling. Like what you feel is like that's what you cannot not do in the world if you're real with yourself. Like there seems to be, the best word I can find is soul. There seems to be a driving force that leads me to something like collective processing. Like, who could ever know from my background that I would write a book and be on podcasts? That was not in my personality at all. And yeah, still life kind of pulls me, or my soul print brings me here. And I think if more of us do that, you become more unique, so more individuated, but you're also more in service of the group, the team, the wider purpose, whatever you call it.
Let me introduce one more. I'm curious how you see that. And it's also dangerous territory. Because the way how it feels like, or how one senses it, is that there is a place where I don't necessarily feel separate from you. So there is my individual self, and it stays there, and it's important for it to stay there. There is also the multiplicity of where we come from, but there is also a place where you sometimes see it in the conversation where it's not important who is saying something. It somehow comes from the same place, and there's somehow the other is saying it, but it seems that somehow it's not so different than I am saying this. So there's an experience of non-separatedness, or where you even could call this. I don't mean it in the deep spiritual sense. Practice of non-duality. That is at least an irritating experience, because it undermines my conviction of separation.
Yeah, and it's a strong conviction that we have.
Yeah.
And yeah, also in how we relate with the physical world, and plants and animals and landscapes and all that. I mean, I had a few experiences where the fragmentation between, let's say, me and nature falls away. That's also like, whoa, yeah, like having a real encounter with an animal. It's like, wow. I mean, for my separate self, that was a huge shock in the beginning. And so it's not only with people, but I guess it's with the whole living world, that slowly but surely that deep idea that this is me, and I kind of end where my skin ends. It's like, it's bullshit. can say so. I mean, I'm one of us practitioners in collective presence uses a lot of times. She used the word porous, like I'm porous, and more and more. I don't think she says more and more influences come in, but we become more aware of how you listen actually influences what I'm going to say. Yeah, that kind of porousness. And if you walk with that sense through the city, you become crazy, I think. So we have learned to shield that off. But I think that's how we are, how we were born, I guess. And we kind of revive that, or bring it to life again, or become aware of it.
That's also partly what I find powerful about the wording collective presencing, because when you really kind of penetrate this presencing, it's not just 2 or 5 or 10 people talking. It's about a collective being present to whatever is present.
Totally, yeah.
And that when you really let it in, it also gets very uncomfortable, because you feel something slightly dissolving, or at least in the danger of dissolving. It seems to be very solid, to be, but it is just true when we pay attention that where we are. You are mentioning before we had this conversation that it's a sunny, cold day today. Right now, it's here. That's part of the conversation.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, and it has an influence. Yeah, it comes in. Like, I'm a gardener, so when there's weeks with no rain and my rainwater is getting very, very low, I mean, that's climate change that comes into me. Yeah, that is, it's not climate change somewhere else, or it's really touching. Of course, if you don't have a garden, that's, the distance is bigger.
Yeah.
But it's cracking that Western idea of I'm within this bag of flesh and that's it. And yeah, it's
interesting that you're making that point, because I really, and I know it's a bold claim, but I just do believe it, that this collective practices that are emerging right now, what you're doing, what we are doing, what others are doing, what I sometimes, as I said, also call kind of a mindfulness 2.0, that it is something that is really a paradigm shift in how we are as a Western culture in the world. It's really undermining this separate subjectivity that we are so much cultivated, that has its also virtue, because our individuation process is connected to that. But there's something where it obviously creates a lot of the problems that we are in, of separation. And I see these practice forms also as a practice form of deconditioning.
Yeah, that's a nice way of saying. Yeah.
Like, I assume 5,000 years ago, there was a lot of practice form developing to find the seeds of individuation in our tribal contexts. And it must have been a huge transformation for people to basically liberate them somehow out of this just being nothing but the embeddedness in a tribal nature context, and be able to to find oneself in this individual itself must have been a huge practice form that we trained in many mystery cults, I don't know, whatever. Our ancestors did in that time, and I guess our religious history is part of this. And my guess is that this is a similar transition point where we are practicing together, and evolution is kind of popping out and finding experimental places where it can experiment with itself.
Yeah, that's indeed what I learned mainly from Benita Roy, is that evolution is happening through us. Yeah, we cannot use, let's say, the tools of modernity and the thinking and analysis to figure out what's coming next, because whatever is next, evolution as it comes from origin will disrupt whatever we have been living in, and it's happening through us, and it's in the doing, in the experimenting, that we build the capacities. So we cannot say, oh, let's first practice this capacity and then we will know what to do. It's a like, yeah, there's a saying about stepping onto the next stone and the stone will meet you, or something. There's a saying somewhere from somebody, I don't remember, but it's that if you sense like, oh, that's what I need, that seems to be what I need to do next, and then reality seems to meet you in a way, or not, and then you make another step. Yeah, that's amazing.
We are unfortunately at the end of our time, and we only could unwrap so much, but it was a very powerful conversation. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Be well.